Welcome to Newsroom, brought to you by Insurance Brokers Alliance. And this is a spot where we talk about everything going on in New Zealand and often overseas as well, from the point of view of our very talented panel, which tonight consists of Stephen O'Connor. Welcome back to the panel, Stephen.
Thanks, Bill.
And Malcolm Gayfer.
Evening, Bill.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
A lot been going on in the news, Malcolm.
There has been a lot going on, Bill.
You'll have to tell me if I pronounce this fella's name right, Dong Hua Lu.
That's as best as I can get it anyway.
First of all, the National Party were in trouble with him. Now he's causing Labor all kinds of problems. I mean, this guy, the question in my mind is, did he donate anything or not? Labor Party says he has no records of it. There's talk of a $100,000 bottle of wine. I was actually trying to work out how much that would be per sip the other day. $100,000, 750 mils, you know, she could have been down to $1,000 a sip. But anyway, is David Cunliffe really in trouble over this, or is it just a lot of hot air?
It's, I think in the overall scheme of things, it's a distraction, but a distraction they don't want. And I see that those air freshener fans we have on our desks was blowing towards David Cunliffe the last few days. It's starting to blow back from whence it came, actually, because there's been some retractions today coming out of the news. And Dong Hua Lu's new statement on Labor donations, he's basically, controversial businessman Dong Hua Lu has issued a new statement to the Herald confirming close to $100,000 in total payments to Labor and its MPs, including anonymous donations, but clarifying the money was not for one bottle of wine. This is from the Herald this afternoon.
Oh, right.
And he goes on to say, and we must remember this phrase, Lu, to whom Labor gave permanent residency against official advice, says his earlier signed statement on the wine auction was capable of two meanings. So we must remember that one. It's a good out, isn't it? Right. Capable of two meanings.
That's right. And that's true. He was given residency against the advice of the Immigration Department.
Yes.
You really wonder why that happens, Stephen. I mean, everybody's asked questions about that kind of stuff, don't they?
Well, they do, but that was the decision made on the day.
Yeah.
But Mr. Lu has clearly clarified his initial statement today in saying that the $100,000 related to donations made to the Labor Party during their term in office, which was over 9 years. So, and clearly he's made substantial donations to both major political parties. And it begs the question is it a big deal?
What's the problem?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah, exactly. What's the problem? Because if he's made donations to both political parties and he's got some problems, when you've got a problem, you go to your MP, don't you? And you ask them.
That's what Kim.com did, didn't it?
That's right. You go to your MP. So if he's made donations to both political parties, is there going to be someone standing in the wings saying, well, because you've made a donation, you now can't go to an MP? Because that's what it almost looks like, doesn't it?
Well, I suppose one question arises. All right, he's admitted he's made donations to Labor and National. Has he made donations to any of the other minor parties, coalition partners?
Oh, right.
Well, has he?
Yeah.
No one's asked that question. We don't know.
No, exactly. They might be being very silent,
yes,
hoping they don't get dragged into the fray.
And it's interesting that on the news today, John Key is backpedaling very quickly over this one.
Right.
Just basically says, well, it's Labor's problem. They've got to deal with it.
Right.
And, you know, a week or so ago, he says, oh, I knew weeks ago what was going on.
Yeah.
There's obviously some leakage in the Labor HQ somewhere for the Nats to get hold of this information, but now he's distancing himself very quickly and very firmly. And as I say, there must be some leaks going on there for the information to get over to the other side.
Some more ammunition. What do you think about the statement? Oh,
I don't think it's about leaks. I mean, clearly this started with Maurice Williamson.
It did.
And at the time, National would have obviously spoken to Mr. Lu and said, you know, what's this all about? And he would have said, well, I've given, you know, plenty of money to Labor as well. Yeah. And so they would have known then, but they've just sort of bided their time in terms of the release of this information. But again, as Malcolm said originally, it's just a distraction. I heard Mr. Cunliffe on Q&A on Sunday saying, you know, it's a smear campaign and that National is just doing political smear campaigns instead of focusing on the issues. Well, who started it?
Yeah, exactly.
And if they both cut the crap out, to excuse my French, but if they would and focus on some of the real issues, like this announcement today from Labor of their shadow budget, so their alternative budget, they've released their alternative budget today,
They have
which makes a far more sense or far more relevance in terms of a political debate than worrying about who donated what to who. And so if they concentrated on the real issues instead of this, this mudslinging, then people might be more focused on connecting with them, which they clearly aren't at the moment.
Right, because it's going to make a far more difference to the country, isn't it? Do you think that, what about Bryce Edwards' suggestion that a regulatory body separate from the Electoral Commission to look at any questions of irregularity or corruption, somewhere where you can say, okay, it's a problem, go to them. Is this a worker? Do you think we need that?
Haven't we got enough commissions at the moment? And,
Well, one does tend to think that. Yeah.
And is this really corruption? I think we've all agreed it's a distraction. But where is the corruption? And you'd have to admit that the Nats up to this point have been using it as a distraction, or what's the word? Distraction or smearing campaign. Let's face it, they're probably trying to smear Cunliffe.
Yes.
And and block any of their announcements. Up until this point, any time David Cunliffe's tried to make an announcement on policy matters, up comes another piece of Dongwa Lu.
Right.
And of course that grabs the headlines, the 6 o'clock news, and they just get squashed. So it's up to that point, it's worked probably in National's favour. But I think that, as I say, that fan's starting to blow back now.
It's interesting, isn't it, what the media actually choose to make the hit. I mean, they're choosing the headlines, the media, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I suppose the other side of the coin is, what else is there to report on out of the beehive, or out of Parliament?
Well, that's it, you see.
And sweet nothing at the moment.
There's not a lot going on, is there?
If they would put out some decent stuff like they did today instead of the mudslinging, then the media would report it, hopefully.
Yeah.
But going back to your original question, Bill, about whether we need another commission or whatever, the system we have at the moment is that people are free to make donations to political parties, and over a certain amount it has to be disclosed. And to me that system's fair. I mean, the only other system you could go for would be publicly funded political parties, i.e. that the taxpayer they'd get an allocation from taxpayer funds,
right,
and you wouldn't be allowed to make personal donations.
Doesn't seem to be a lot of support for that.
No, there doesn't, and I think in a democracy, I think people should be allowed to make donations to whom they choose, but that certainly there should be some disclosure where there are significant funds being provided, because that's only fair.
Transparency at a certain level.
Correct.
Yep. Yeah. And I think I don't think there'd be much deviation from that line of thought either. I think most Kiwis just want to say, look, just get on with it. It's got to be right. If it is going to be a lot of money, well, it really ought to be out there, but more interested in knowing what the government actually does rather than this. This is really trivia.
Yeah.
It's really trivia, isn't it?
I will say, though, and it's also come out today, that David Cunliffe, I think, is inside spewing over this and fuming.
Yes.
And the Herald broke the story the other day about this $100,000 bottle of wine, and now he's not in so many words, but he is pointing to the Herald. I want an apology, please. And in future, get your facts right. And I think he does have a fair point on that. And now he's looking at. Well,
they do have a responsibility. I mean, they've got a wide readership to get something, particularly something like that, where it does reflect on a person, or in this case, a party. Otherwise, it might be seen to be biased. We wouldn't want any of that.
No, certainly not.
Not in the media.
Aren't politicians, past masters at innuendo and sort of saying things without
capable
saying
of two
things?
meanings?
Yeah. I mean, a certain person springs to mind who's the leader of another party in the House that is just a past master at it. And,
yes, someone who's been there for a long time.
Yes. But anyway, do we want to talk about Labor's alternative budget?
Yes. You mentioned that before, so tell us what you think, because what they're doing is proposing an increase in taxes. They're going to raise the 33 cent level. They were speaking 39, weren't they?
Originally, yes.
And now they're aiming for 36 cents.
Correct.
And then then some mention perhaps in the long term we might get a tax cut. Now, I didn't pick up what the tax cut was for. I was quite interested.
Well, the crux of it is that they are increasing the top tax bracket to 36 cents for incomes over $150,000.
Okay.
So that only impacts on 2% of the taxpayers.
Right.
So that doesn't seem unreasonable to me. And they're increasing the trust tax rate in line with that to 36. So otherwise you'd create.
Do you think that's a good thing?
Well, otherwise you create a loophole.
Okay. Right.
If you've got a different tax rate for the trusts than you have for the highest personal tax rate, then people are just going to use trust.
What is the situation now? Do trusts pay the same as the highest tax
Correct.
rate? They do.
They both pay 33 at the moment.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
And the other course one is the capital gains tax, which they've campaigned on before. So in doing so, introducing capital gains tax and increasing the top tax rate for both individuals and trusts, they maintain that they'll create enough revenue to do everything that they want to do and pay down debt faster than under National's regime.
Right.
And they're saying that if they were re-elected, so given that they were elected this year,
yes,
if they were re-elected again in 3 years' time, that there would be room for tax cuts for middle New Zealand.
At that point.
Not for the top earners.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the crux of it. What they've.
Does this seem to be something which would be acceptable? You know.
Well, I mean, I'd be quite happy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's going to take a bit more than that to get them across the line.
Yes.
The way they're going at the moment.
But they made a start. There's something else I was going to say about those tax cuts too. I'm just trying to think what it was. It was the 30. Oh, we're on 33 cents at the moment. Yeah. Oh, anyway, maybe it'll come back to me.
I'm just thinking about Labor's minority partners. Would they be in favour of this, or would they work with that?
I think they would. I mean, it's all about making the rich pay a little bit more, and
that'll be Bill.
Yeah.
We wish. We wish.
It's interesting though that the top, it only affects the top 2% of taxpayers, and at the moment they contribute 22% of the income tax take. So you might argue that they're already doing their fair share.
Do they? Top 2%, 22%?
Yeah, of the income tax take. But of course that totally ignores GST, which has a much higher impact on lower income earners than it does on higher income earners.
That is an area of inequality, isn't it? It means that essentially they are paying more tax.
It's just the way that tax works.
Yeah. Now, the other thing they said they're going to do is go after multinationals.
Yes, they are.
That's the thing I was trying to remember.
Yeah. Which is hard. It's a good thing to do, but it's a lot harder to achieve.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the likes of your Googles and your Facebooks and that clearly have New Zealand operations and make money in New Zealand, but don't pay any New Zealand income tax because they route all their income through Ireland or wherever they have low tax status, good tax status.
Yeah. And that'll be substantial money, I presume.
Yes. But they're not New Zealand's not the only one that's looking at that, and I think if the Globe wants to make a combined effort to make sure that people pay tax in the countries where they actually earn the money, that would be the best way to attack that, I reckon.
Yeah.
Has any of the parties thus far come up with, I think it's starting to be a problem of people buying stuff off eBay and what have you, and of course not paying the GST on that. Apparently there's huge amounts of money just not being collected there.
That's another issue that I think needs to probably be tackled on a global basis, and it would be great if they could stop it, but it's just how they do it, because they've talked about the only way they can do this is through some sort of transaction tax on bank accounts. Because
which was actually put forward as a method of collecting tax by the Alliance Party, wasn't it, a few years ago?
Yeah, somebody suggested it. I just can't remember who it was.
Some very small, and it was that other party that was an offshoot of the old social credit suggested that too.
Oh yes,
Because it's the money flows that you can probably tax, whereas if you try and tax a transaction that's happening over the internet, I mean, good luck with that.
Hopeless. As it happens, anything you bring into the country, I think over $400 you have to pay GST on. It's only the small. It's only small packages. Like if you get it if they catch it at the border, and that the person who has sold it to you has put it, and generally those companies will do this, put an amount on the outside it's worth more than $400. Then you get it. I've had one once, something I imported, and you get a little bill from them. You pay the GST, and when you pay the GST, we send you the goods. Works really well actually. But that's interesting. So, but as you say, Stephen, there's been a lot of attention gone onto other things, but they've released that policy. So there's one thing. They need a few more things like that to get back in the good news department, really, don't they? What about the Labour Party list, Malcolm? Have you had a look at it?
Not a great concentrated look on it. I heard some comment yesterday, and various sort of big names, I understand, have been dropped down the list.
Right.
But the actual detail, I haven't been fully au fait with it. So what's your opinion?
Well, I did a bit of reading on it, and it seems like the general... The general comment is that it's nothing too exciting and doesn't leave much room for new people coming up through the party. In fact, one comment was made that that if they went into the 2017 election, it could set them up for just more of the same. And I'll read you the quote from the Otago Daily. Quote the Otago Daily: "If Labor was seeking renewal through its list, it has failed badly." Oh. So, yeah, whereas apparently National is bringing in 15 new ones that could make their way into Parliament. What were your thoughts on it, Stephen?
Yeah, I had a quick look at it, and as you say, it's not very exciting, but the key was that they have to poll at least 32% before any new members of Parliament would make it in. Yeah. Even if they are successful in upping their ratings, they're not going to attract probably much more than mid-30s. So, you know, they won't be bringing too many new bodies to Parliament.
Which is a real problem for them.
Yeah.
They have got a few new ones standing in seats, around the country, but they don't really want to be reliant on that, I guess.
No, I wouldn't think so.
Yes, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about John Key's visit to the United States, so stay with us. We'll see you soon. Welcome back to Newsroom. Well, John Key's been in the United States, Stephen, and visiting Barack Obama. He seems to be getting on very well with them, actually. In fact, they seem to be great friends, played golf together, done all sorts of things now. But we're hearing the news that the TPP is unlikely to be finalised, maybe 2015. Has this agreement, is it ever going to get finalised, and is it good for New Zealand? Because this is what John Key was talking about, one of the things, wasn't it?
It was certainly on the agenda, I imagine.
Yes.
Is it a good thing for New Zealand? Well, we don't know, because we don't know any details, and we won't know until it's actually been negotiated, and then it'll come forward for ratification, I imagine. I understand it has to be ratified by Parliament before it can be signed off. But so we won't know until we see the detail. But I would have thought that any sort of trade agreement, if it's beneficial to New Zealand, would be good. Having said that, there's been a lot of people sort of making noises about TPP and secrecy and
corporates ruling the world.
And what we're talking about here, of course, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is being discussed, which I didn't say. People might not know what we mean. Yeah, right. Yeah. And because of the secrecy thing. Yeah. Yeah,
and of course the answer that's always been given back on that is, well, we can't make our negotiations open to every man and his dog because it's quite sensitive, and we're in sensitive negotiations, and we need to be able to negotiate, and then we'll come up with what we think's best, and then you can have your say. Which
did I hear a report? I either heard it or read it that President Obama has said that he won't have anything to say until at least November, because he's not releasing anything until November. So we'll be further down the food chain.
Have they got congressional elections or something?
Midterm
elections, yes. So he's not letting any cats out of the bag at the moment. So, and he'll meet up with Key again at another summit in Asia, I think, in November. Yeah. And we do not know anything until
Key or
that time.
There seems to be a lot of concern. Of course, one of the benefits for New Zealand is that if we get into this thing, that maybe we'll get better agricultural access into the United States. We were blocked off by tariffs and by quotas and all sorts of things, and Japan. But there's a bit of concern that when these tariffs and quotas are removed, that'll be the US and Japan will say how they're removed and how long it'll take. Well, some commentators are saying it could take 20 years for them to disappear, whilst in the meantime, we might lose, for example, Pharmac's ability to buy drugs outside the United States of America at a cheaper rate. Or we might lose, and we'd be subject to extended copyrights for 70 years. And some are saying this looks like a situation of the United States of America controlling the smaller partners for their own benefit.
But Bill, that's pure speculation.
It is speculation, exactly, because as you say, we don't know.
And why would we enter into an agreement like that?
Well, that was the other thing, and I just listened to something you said a minute ago, Stephen, was it must be beneficial to us.
Yeah.
And one commentator said, if a trade agreement's not beneficial for you, then you don't sign the thing.
Exactly.
But beneficial in what way?
Well, there you are. Maybe better trade, maybe better access to markets.
There's certainly a concerted effort to get better relations with the US, and that has to be lauded. But this TPP trade may not be affected per se, but we certainly get a better relationship with the US. We might be upgraded to actual ally status. At the moment, we're friends, aren't we?
It almost seems like we have been. I mean, are they, when you look at some of the things which were actually said while Key was in the US, for example, at a joint press conference, and I'm quoting from Tracy Watkins in Washington here as the staff correspondent, at a joint press conference with Key, if the US expected New Zealand's moral or practical support, Kerry suggested that was not in question. John Kerry, Secretary of State: "We know our friends, we don't have to ask. This is one where we know that New Zealand stands with us." And we're talking about Iraq there. But it almost seems like we've moved a lot closer, Malcolm.
Oh, we
and
have.
It's taken for granted.
Oh, we have, and that has to be applauded. The close relationship. And I think I said on this program some time ago, other leaders just must be kicking themselves. How do I get a private game of golf with Barack Obama? This guy from the Antipodes, way down the bottom of the ocean, can ring him up and say, "Let's have a game of golf on Saturday after." Yes, on first name
John
terms.
here.
Yeah,
it almost seems like that.
Well, they're obviously very close personal friends, and both have holiday homes in Hawaii.
Right.
And why not get together on a Saturday and Sunday and have a game of golf? But I say other leaders must be just kicking themselves. How do I do this? How do I get hold of this Barack Obama and make friends with him? And it probably will come to pass that the president will come to New Zealand.
Well, that seems to be what's being
probably
suggested.
sooner than later. And looking back on this trip to the US, you'd have to say it's a triumph for John Key and our relationship with the US.
How does this all sit with China, though? I mean, we sell most of our stuff to China, Stephen. We really do. I mean, our agricultural products, our milk goes there, all sorts of stuff goes there. And isn't it going to make China uneasy? I mean, they're not exactly bosom buddies.
With the US?
Yeah, I know they own a lot of US bonds, but I don't know if that I don't know if that makes them bedfellows.
Yeah, I think it's a fine line. It's great to have really close relationships with the US and with China, but for all, you've always got to have your own. You can't have your own independence compromised, and so if you're able to have these great relationships with the major financial powers in the world without compromising your own independence, I think it's great. And whether or not our relationship with China is impacted by our relationship with the US, it doesn't appear to be at this stage. And it's the other thing about the TPP, just going back to that, is that at the moment, where we're heading at the moment is almost a substantial reliance on selling a lot of our product into China. Now that's a very dangerous thing. I mean, that happened back in the 60s, 70s when we were reliant on the UK.
Yep.
And that fell over. And the same thing could happen if you get reliant on China. So the more diversity of trade you can have, the better, which I think is why we should definitely be exploring the TPP, provided that it, as I said before, that it is beneficial to us.
At the end of the day. Yeah. Well, how many? There's 12 nations involved, aren't there? And I'm not sure what the other one. Oh, Thailand's one of them. Thailand, Japan, US, Australia, New Zealand, some Pacific Islands.
Yeah, it's all the Asia Pacific.
All the Asia Pacific group. Yeah. So TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. So it's interesting. And I suppose at the end of the day, this thing was basically set up as a response to the European Economic Union. I mean, that's what they're doing. And it has been said that you can't survive unless you have those kind of trade agreements. With China somehow awkwardly fitting in on the left elbow, so as to speak. Well, that's interesting. We'll follow that one. Just what we're still talking about John Key's visit to the United States. Has been one or two cartoons around. Politicians, I noticed Garrett Tremane's in the Otago Daily with worn-out trouser knees as we attempt to get onto the Security Council. Should we be spending all this money flying politicians to New Zealand, Malcolm, to try and get us? Is it so important to get into the Security Council? Why do we need to be there?
Why do we need to be there?
It's only a temporary place.
Well, I suppose if you've got to get your name on the stage, you might as well look for any stage you can and do the best to get yourself on that particular stage. And the Security Council is one of the big ones internationally. So if you've got to spend that money and wine and dine and schmooze the voters, as it were, then why not? It's just a cost of part of the process. So I don't really have a problem with it.
Okay. Yeah, and do you think we could be
And look, going to Queenstown, shot over jet, what better publicity for these people from, Africa and people that wouldn't necessarily, come to New Zealand, let alone go to Queenstown. Publicity's priceless.
I suppose they've got money, haven't they?
Ooh,
It's always a secondary effect. Could we be much influenced there, do you think, Stephen? They're going to take any notice of us if we do get on the Security Council?
That's an interesting one, and I relate it to a personal experience where I was involved in an international body, a global board, and one of the things I thought I brought to the board was because that I was from New Zealand, which was minuscule in the scheme of things.
Right.
I wasn't really involved in the political game. And so I was able to sort of stand aside and diffuse situations or come in with a third-party voice.
You're the referee.
Almost,
Yeah.
where the big boys are, they're trying to manoeuvre and manoeuvre themselves into
Right.
positions, and New Zealand as a small nation can sort of, as you say, play the referee or stand up for the underdog.
Yeah.
And so I don't have an issue with us trying to get on there. And how much money have we spent? I'm not quite sure, but in the scheme of things, it's probably not a substantial amount. And it has also has the spin-off of promoting New Zealand, because no doubt when those bigwigs were here, that they were followed by international press, and so again, New Zealand got some good publicity.
And we always were a member of it back in the, I'm going to say the 70s, I'm not sure, was it the Muldoon government era? Or we certainly were a member of the Security Council back then. I remember reading the news on it and thinking at the time, as a young fella, that it was unusual that such a small country was there and had quite a lot to say, actually.
Yeah. Well, it probably goes hand in hand too, and I might talk about this a bit later, but of course Helen Clark is, number 2 or number 3 in the United Nations as well.
So, now, yeah.
1, 2, that's good publicity for us.
Yeah, right. And there's some thought that she could end up as Secretary General.
Well, I think there's more than some thought.
Right.
I see Rachel Smalley's written, I think, a very good article in the Herald, which comes out today, actually, or came out today, Women Who Could Change the World. She goes on to 2017, and Hillary Clinton will be president of the USA. Helen Clark will be...
You reckon?
Well, this is just conjecture. Could have two meanings here.
We've had father and son. Now we could have husband and wife, followed by wife.
Yes.
Yeah. And which would be the better?
I'd like to debate that one with you.
I'm just reporting.
I don't think America's ready for a female president.
Well, were they ready for a black president?
Yes, they got over that bridge, but I don't know about the next one.
Times might be moving faster than we think. And Helen Clark will be number 1 of the United Nations, as you mentioned, and Christine Lagarde, who runs the International Monetary Fund, will be there as well, running the International Monetary Fund.
Right.
So 3 women running very important, powerful organisations.
And of course, Janet Yellen is now the chairman of the Federal Reserve in the US.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Some would say that with these women running things, there'll be a lot less scrapping going on.
Well, it might be a whole new perspective.
Some would say. Far be it from me. Yeah, so Security Council, John Key, as you were saying, very successful visit. I mean, there is a lot going on the international stage at the moment.
Yes.
And but coming home, you've been reading about a stabbing in a schoolyard, Malcolm, in Auckland.
That's led the news over the last couple of days, and it really is disturbing stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, one incident, I think, were a couple of 11-year-olds there or thereabouts, and one sustained a life-threatening injury after what's thought to be a pair of scissors was involved at a Christian school, Pacific Christian school in South Auckland. And there's apparently another fight just down the road with a couple of teenagers also hospitalised. And I mentioned before about David Cunliffe getting tripped up every time he tries to make an announcement.
Yes. One
of his MPs, Mangere MP, which is the local electorate, Sir William Seo comments that boys will be boys when discussing stabbing involving schoolboys. Of course, that's going to get the headlines over and above David Cunliffe's announcement.
Yes.
And, boys are going to be boys.
Yes.
And, fights in the schoolyard are probably going to be there forever and a day. But when, apparently a pair of scissors is involved and life-threatening injuries...
Following very closely on the heels of 2 early teenage boys murdering a guy in Auckland.
Well, that came up in the news today as well. The other second boy has been had a charge relayed, a more serious manslaughter charge actually. So that's... And I thought at the time, I actually thought when the the woman, Blessy, who went home on the bus and was found dead in the cemetery a couple of days. I wondered if that was actually going to be a tipping point for the community, particularly Auckland. This is enough violence on the streets. But here we've got fights in schoolyards. The other incident you just mentioned. Where is the tipping point going to come where people say, we've had enough, we want more enforcement?
Why are young people picking up weapons and doing this? They never used to. Why are they doing it?
Well, there could be a lot of answers to that, but one of them some influence has to come back to video games and the violence that's involved in that.
Yeah, and I think that I've noticed it in doing 30-something years teaching as well, that kids will reflect what they see on the screen. And I think that the censors in this country have got a lot to answer for in terms of that kind of thing. They can make all kinds of politically correct statements and things like, well, it's up to the parents to control it. No, what we have led into this place in terms of that violence, I think we are now reaping it. We're now reaping it. And in that respect, it's our own fault. Okay, I blame the censors. Well, maybe I should blame the people who appoint the censors. Maybe I should blame all of us for not shouting out louder and saying, get this stuff. Get this stuff away, get rid of it.
Is the genie bolted from the bottle then?
Well, it has for that generation, but at any time you can haul it back so the new generation coming through doesn't see it.
Or can you haul it back?
Well, I think you just have to reset the limits. We've done it with legal highs and said they were there, now they're not. Sometimes you have to.
But they'll be there somewhere. They're not available in retail
and of
shops,
course,
but they'll be around somewhere.
That's right, and what's coming in via the internet or stuff like that.
And anybody can, apart from me, can make up an app on their phone to any sort of game or plot anything they like on their phone.
Yeah.
In the lunch hour.
Yeah. Well,
that
easily.
So I'm told, or some,
that's right.
Some pretty sharp kids out there.
I wonder myself if it's not going to be the case the government has to focus on, in schools at very early levels now, of having anti-violence programs and being prepared to put the money in to do it. We put a lot of money in at the other end for prisons. We've got prisons stacked with people, but I've often seen the case, where kids, there'll be a problem, everybody knows the problem, social workers know there's a problem, schools know there's a problem, even the parents will know they've got a problem with their kids. They find it very hard to get assistance. We should never hear those words, should we? It should be there and waiting. And the police, I think, sometimes really struggle because they see young people, and that's about cry over these kids. They see them, they could even be preteen kids who are just going down a pathway. Everybody can see where it's going to end up, but there just seems to be no appropriate action that can be taken to forestall it. Certain things you can do, but there's limits. You can't get the help, or it's not there, not enough of it, or whatever it is.
I think you'll probably back this up. Even primary teachers will, I've heard testify that they can see 5 and 6 year olds in the classroom and know a bit of their background and just know that they're going to go down a rocky road.
Yeah.
And what was disturbing to me about those two boys who had the altercation with the shop owner in Henderson, who's now deceased, one of the boys who was first charged with murder, came out that his parents were known, or they were known to police.
Yes.
That's not a good indictment. We don't know what led to this
both
incident.
Boys charged with murder there now?
I have a feeling one is charged with murder. Now the second one is charged with manslaughter.
The first tragedy is obviously that gentleman, a very tremendous guy, but a community member and whatnot. He's now passed on because of it. The second tragedy is the lives of these boys.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
apparently one, I think, his father is in prison and his mother had been. As I say, known to police, and we don't know what led up to it, but you could probably imagine it was something small, trivial, and it's just quickly blown up into complete disaster.
It's interesting too that I noticed, it said this was a Christian school, and the media have been making a bit of that, but I think it's often the case, I've known people who've taught at these places, that sometimes those schools take on kids who, they'll take them on, or parents will put them there to try and sort them out, and they're left sorting out things like that, and this is got out of control, obviously.
Again, we don't know what happened. It could have been some scuffle over something and someone just grabbed a pair of scissors in self-defence and it's just blown up, into a complete tragedy.
Exactly.
Last we heard, I think the boy is still in a critical but stable condition in hospital. So it's just awful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not good.
And you can't just centralise it to South Auckland. It could happen anywhere.
having said all those things, I'm happy to report that just in my reading and just sort of stuff going around in education circles and whatnot, there's a heck of a lot of good work going on. I mean, so this kind of behaviour, I mean, I don't see a lot of it, of course, where I am. Even in Southland, we don't, you know, particularly in a girls' school. It's just, but I know there are schools who handle a lot of it. They put a huge amount of stuff in place, everything they can, but sometimes that's not enough. They need extra resources, and when they identify things, they're really struggling. But I don't think there'll be any problem with identifying who needs it. It's just the next step.
Yeah, and I suppose it raises the interesting question, you know, when and how do you bring in that assistance?
Yeah.
You know, you can't just march into somebody's home and say, you need assistance.
No.
And, you know, you need to do this, you need to do that.
Here's something interesting.
You'll get shown the door again.
Here's something really interesting, and it's sort of a bit off the topic, but in India, all the kids in all the state schools, they, how many do they say of them? 150 million or something, or some large number. Every kid is given lunch.
Is that
The
right?
Indian government, they give them lunch. Yeah, and they say, because I've often thought, how come those kids, they're living in poverty, but they look actually quite healthy? They've got a food program. No kid takes lunch to school, it's served up. What a happy note. A happy note to go to a break on Stay With Us. When we come back, we're talking about more things going on around the country, plus topics of interest. See you soon. Welcome back to Newsroom. Malcolm, tell us about the America's Cup. We were going to talk about the America's Cup, and Malcolm's got the latest news on it.
Well, I just read on the internet this afternoon, apparently reports out that America's Cup Challenge is a goer without government funding.
Good.
So they've raised the money.
No more of my taxes.
Having said that,
Yes.
I've been monitoring Facebook on the sites like Stuff and New Zealand Herald, and the opposition to any sort of America's Cup Challenge is astounding. And the one thing the government will be looking at that, monitoring the talkback, and I think probably on the talkback too, the opposition is definitely there. People have had a gutsful of the America's Cup actually.
Yeah.
The amount of money spent on it, you know, where are the tangible benefits? You can argue that till the cows come home, but there's definitely, or has been, a mood of resentment towards anything to do with the America's Cup, especially when they said, you know, we're going to run out of money by the end of the month. We can carry on
$2 million salary,
Yeah, so that didn't go down very well at all.
Lead balloon stuff,
Yeah, you know, they said the sponsors will kick in when we know where the challenge is going to take place. And they stack it against us. There's no question about that. Yeah. And, you know, then I think on Campbell Live the other night, Brad Butterworth had the gall to say, you know, I might be a man to run the next cup. I think people were showing him the door pretty quickly as well. So I think the government would have taken note too. There's a definite mood of, you know, we've had enough of America's Cup. Something else may be, but we've been there,
call
done
by
that.
Stephen Joyce, was it? Do you think, Stephen?
Absolutely. And I don't think it's so much that the public's had a guts full of the America's Cup. I think what got their backup was that when Grant Dalton tried to sort of blackmail the government into saying, well, you know, we're going to run out of money if you don't fund us.
Right.
And then we had the disclosure of the salaries, which may or may not be justified. I mean, Grant Dalton's salary, given that he was the major fundraiser as well, could well be justified on the basis that he was getting a percentage of whatever funds he raised. But that's a question that I can't have no information on. But I would be very surprised. They've now said that they've got enough money to get them through to the end of the year, and then the sponsors will kick in. But I'd be very surprised if the government doesn't front with some more money into the next challenge, because it is a good investment. It's been proven to be a good investment for the country. What are the
returns?
The payback was in excess of what was outlaid, both in terms of tax revenues from the money that was spent directly in Auckland, with the construction of boats, etc., etc. But also the benefits from the direct benefits or the indirect benefits of the publicity that we received, which flows through to our tourism revenues. So I still believe it's a great investment. I still believe the government will put money in, but they weren't going to have a bar of bailing them out. They have to get their own house in order before they'll come in and say, okay, yes, we are going to contribute to the next challenge.
Having said that, and I agree with you, it has been a good investment, but I thought the time may be right to say, bring in our own develop our own yacht race, yacht series, which will bring in other countries which can't get into the America's Cup.
Like Auckland to Bluff, do you think, Malcolm?
Oh, well, that's another story.
That's actually a very good idea because it has become very elitist, the America's Cup, and
Yeah.
so you have to have big gold to get in there.
And big pockets.
And to have a mini America's Cup, if you, for want of a better term, that was accessible to far more parties, could be a goer. Actually, it's probably worth exploring.
Oh, I think it's very much a goer, you know.
Yeah.
The number of countries that could, you know, at least express an interest, you'd probably be surprised.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of countries do
Well, we're a very yachty nation, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, we'd have the right to run something like that.
Oh, just imagine if, you know, the Chinese and some of the Asian countries, Indian Asians countries got involved,
Well,
South America's.
Look how you know, I remember when the first Ironman contests started. You know, I think the first one was at Wanaka, and it would have been in correct me if I'm wrong, but late 70s or something. Because I can remember clearly some of the guys I was working with at the time, one of them took off up there, he said, after the Ironman. So, and it went from there, we got triathlons, we got gold rushes, all kinds of things all over the country. And then of course we have the coast to coast, and the country is swamped with people coming in from overseas to go on these challenges.
Correct.
So they know it's New Zealand, they know what sort of country we are. So we could set something up, which wasn't just any old yacht race. It could be, I don't know, Crosscook straight and back or something, or whatever it was, you know, 3 times around the ferries.
It'd have to be probably based in Auckland.
Yeah,
probably. That's where the infrastructure is, you know.
Exactly.
But some sort of local series which would attract a whole new fleet of international contestants. I think it'd be great.
That's a very good thought.
With the America's Cup, we don't know where it's going to be held.
No.
San Francisco's apparently been ruled out.
Correct.
Speaking of money, the
Yes.
mayor's rattling a tin. Stephen knows about that.
I think the reaction to the Rattling Tin campaign's about as good as the reaction to the America's Cup team, New Zealand, wanting more money.
Right.
And probably justifiably so too. To some extent, I think that a lot of people are saying, "Well, you guys, you've made your bed, so you can sleep in it." There was no public consultation into how big or grandiose the stadium was going to be, and now
that's what we're talking about, folks. It's the stadium, and we need $5 million to finish paying for it. And Mayor Tim sort of has been in the news rattling a tin, going around the other councils looking for some support. So, yes.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? It's. I think a lot of people are saying, well, you know, just being repeatedly asked for money.
It's like if it had been done at the front end, so they had said, right, this is how much we need, and this is what we're going to build, and we've only got this much, and we've got a gap, so we're asking the public for a contribution. And the public would have said, well, okay, that's fair. We think you're doing this is the appropriate stadium that we should have. That's what it's going to cost, and you're short, so yeah, I'll chip in. But to do it, ask about face, now come with your hand out after you've gone and spent the money or committed the
built
money.
The stadium.
Yeah, built the stadium. I think they'll struggle, personally, from the people that I've been talking to.
There is the case, though, that we are the big town, so in the middle, so we have to build the facilities, and do the others all get to use them free and our ratepayers pay for them? I mean,
that's another argument. I mean, it's a fantastic facility. No one's doubting that. It's a fantastic facility, and I see today's paper that the dairy industry had their conference there the last 3 days and raving about the facilities and coming back in 2 years, which is fantastic. But the public at large will not be very amid with contributing towards it.
Right.
But the councils, the district and Gore, I think there's a case for them to be chipping in a wee bit more, given that it is a
well, the overspend really
facility.
Wasn't intentional, was it? I mean, they were caught out by having to meet new earthquake regulations and all sorts of things.
Yes and no. I mean, is it more grandiose than it should have been? Don't know. It's a fantastic facility, but did it need to be that good?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're going to build a facility, build a facility, and I don't have a problem with going for the top shelf, so to speak, so long as it's not totally grandiose.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a rock and a hard place one, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, $5 million is actually not a lot of money when you think about it in terms of Dunedin Stadium, isn't it? Like,
No.
They would dream of having a $5 million debt, I'm quite sure.
Yes, they would.
So I've said to one or two people down here that living at Southland is a place where things do get done, because we are a province with a lot of financial resources, aren't we? I mean, we've got an extremely good, wealthy, well-managed community trust. We have our licensing trust. We've got a lot of sources of money down here.
Yeah, and
we've done pretty well.
Spoken to people up and down the country, and
can't believe it.
Cities, roughly the size of Invercargill, and they just do not have the facilities that we have.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So I suppose if you're going to again build a facility, build it the best you can.
That's right.
And that's how you're going to attract events like the Dairy Conference and.
It's our Scottish heritage, I think.
But you can make the same case for the outdoor stadium, which of course we haven't heard much about recently.
No.
I mean, I'd far sooner contribute to pay that off than the indoor one.
Yeah.
Because it was built on the smell of an oily rag and wasn't actually completed in the first place when it was done, and it's been piecemeal, done little bits in here and there, and they upgraded, or they sort of did some more work to it when we had the Rugby World Cup, and it's been plagued with funding issues.
You need a big focus, you reckon?
Well, I'm just comparing the two and saying, if what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough.
You raised the topic of the Dunedin Stadium. I think it was touted at the time it's going to be a multifaceted stadium, rugby, concerts. But then I go and ask the question, why aren't the Eagles performing there? Why didn't Bruce Springsteen perform there? Why didn't the Rolling Stones perform there? Why isn't Katy Perry performing there? Yeah. Fleetwood Mac, well, they were booked, but they got taken away. I think that side of it's a lost cause.
It's a fantastic facility, though.
Well, for rugby, probably yes.
Yeah, I mean, even for the concerts I've heard.
I've heard
we've heard the acoustics are not that great.
Yeah.
And then the total stadium, parts of it are not that
very hard to make a facility good for sporting, good for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're going to go to topics of interest, and Stephen, we'll go to you first.
Righty ho. I've got a a plug actually.
Oh, good.
And
we're into that.
What it is, the Citizens Advice Bureau in Invercargill, in conjunction with the Institute of Financial Advisors Southland branch, are launching a new initiative which will start next week. It's a financial advice clinic, which will be run on a monthly basis, the first Wednesday of each month between the hours of 1 and 2.
Right.
So members of the Institute of Financial Advisors in Invercargill will be offering free general financial advice.
Okay.
So it's designed to explain the different investment or financial services options to people, and ensure that people understand terminology and implications and the options that are out there. Yeah. It's not designed to provide specific personalised advice. It's just designed to give them the heads up as to what's there and what maybe their options are.
Right.
So that's an initiative that Citizens Advice Bureau and the Institute in Southland, the Institute of Financial Advisors in Southland, have come up with, and we're delighted. And obviously, I'm a member. In fact, I'm the chair of the Southland branch.
Right.
And we're delighted to be able to offer that service to them.
Now, where do people go to access it?
The Citizens Advice Bureau will are running all the administrative aspects of it, so they'll take the bookings.
Okay. And it'll be at the Bureau?
It's at the Bureau.
At the Citizens Advice Bureau. And what date now? We said what day of the month it'll be?
First Wednesday of every month.
First Wednesday?
Starting next Tuesday. Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday is going to be the first one.
The 2nd of July.
From then on, first Wednesday every month, Citizens Advice Bureau for your financial advice. Yeah, from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock.
Yep.
Cool. Well done.
Excellent. Good initiative.
Yeah.
Good initiative.
I'll say.
Yeah.
Coming from a man who no doubt deals with a lot of people spending large sums of money.
Well, yes, that could be another topic for another day, actually.
Yes.
And I'm not spending enough. Not spending enough. Yeah. That's my role is in real estate now, so we need people spending more money.
There you go. There you go.
My topics of interest at the moment, one which is getting the headlines at the moment, from my reckoning, there's 4 hotspots that we should be looking at, and the one particularly in Iraq.
Yes.
I'm looking at with the shades down a bit, this could almost be the disintegration of Iraq as we know it.
Right.
And that could have really widespread effects. See, petrol's already starting to go up now due to this. Syria, Egypt, Iraq and Ukraine are the 4 hotspots that I think everybody should be keeping an eye on in the months, years to come. And just to finish on a sad note, one of my passions, of course, is music. And Jerry Goffin died just last week, age of 75. He would have written a lot of songs you would remember, Bill, like Will You Love Me Tomorrow, Take Good Care of My Baby, Locomotion. With his wife then, Carole King.
Right.
And also, I didn't realise actually till today, he co-wrote Saving All My Love For You, for which Whitney Houston had a big hit in the 80s.
Goodness sake. How old was he?
75.
Right.
I think he again succumbed to drugs and what have you in his heyday and suffered some ill health, but he got to 75, so he's got a long legacy.
Goodness me.
Which has probably been overlooked a bit in the annals of music history.
And we are starting to see some of these old boys, drop off now, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we, as you say, because of their drug legacies, we really have wondered how some of them have lived so long.
Look at the Rolling Stones.
Make a scientific study of them before it's too late. The endurance of the human body against chemicals. So
look at Keith Richards. He's your living example.
I know, absolutely. I think I'm going to get time for a topic of interest on my own, which doesn't normally happen. And a big one, this is a really big one, that I have become increasingly frustrated by people saying in the media, the proof is in the pudding.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
The proof is in the pudding. You keep hearing them saying the proof is in the proof was never in the pudding. The proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Yes,
A sports person somewhere who didn't quite know the phrase used it. Then I've heard it used several times. Then I've heard people who I thought should know better. These are media commentators and whatnot actually come up, or people commenting in the media, saying the proof is in the pudding. Stop it! Please stop it! The proof is not in the pudding. The proof of the pudding is in the eating.
At the end of the day.
And a very dear friend of mine, a retired teacher, trained in the classics, arts and all sorts of things, and English and history, said to me, can somebody in the National Party please stop Mr. Key saying he had a fulsome time in the United States? He did not have a fulsome time. That is not the usage of that word at all.
Fulsome time?
What's that?
A fulsome time.
Apparently he said he had a fulsome, something about him having a fulsome time. Well, he did not have a fulsome time. He might have had a time full of all sorts of good things, but not a fulsome time. That's a word used in other contexts, which we shan't go into on the show at the moment, but it wasn't right, according to her. So that's good. Thank you, Barbara, for that. Yes.
Their end of the lesson.
We're much the wiser now.
And on a very positive note, text language is practically gone on the way out. Yep. I get texts from young people occasionally and whatnot, and where are you? You're supposed to be here doing a tutorial or something. And it's now, you don't get much text language because the new phones automatically put the words in.
Oh,
So it's made my day. I always refuse to use text language. I hate the stuff. And it seems like that technology which introduced it has just as quickly stripped it from the system, and it shall be gone forever.
Right,
we
that's
hope.
Good.
Yeah, anything that degrades the language is not to be encouraged.
I agree. I agree.
Yep. Do let us know if you think we're wrong.
Our address is...
Well, of course we never are.
Which of course we never are. Thank you so much to my panel, Stephen O'Connor and Malcolm Gayfer.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time in about a couple of weeks. See you later. Thanks for watching.